The sprawling mansion of CEO Raymond Lancaster was the epitome of luxury, an architectural marvel of marble pillars, crystal chandeliers, and floors polished so perfectly they reflected every sparkle of light. The event of the evening was not just any party, but a grand social gathering meticulously organized under the pretense of charity and networking. Invitations were sent only to the most influential families in high society, politicians, business magnates, ambassadors, and aristocrats whose status alone shook entire circles. However, beneath the glittering surface and well-curated smiles, the occasion held a secret purpose known only to the CEO himself. Raymond Lancaster, a powerful tycoon with an empire spanning finance, real estate, and technology, had decided it was time for his adult son, Adrian, to choose a woman who could one day hold the title that once belonged to his late wife. The world assumed he wanted Adrian to pick a bride, but in truth, Raymond was searching for someone polished, elegant, and publicly fitting, a woman who could fill the social and emotional void of a mother figure in their fractured family legacy. Adrian's childhood had been shadowed by his mother's untimely death and his father's obsession with status and legacy, but no one openly spoke about that. To set his plan in motion, Raymond curated every detail of the evening with perfectionist precision. The venue glowed with golden lights, champagne fountains shimmered, and orchestral music floated through the air like silk. Women dressed in designer gowns drifted from one circle to another, displaying charm rehearsed through years of privilege. Their families whispered about alliances, inheritances, and influence as if relationships were business deals sealed with eye contact. Even the seating arrangements, menus, entertainment, and valet service were calculated to impress. It was not love he sought for his son, but prestige, a partnership that could reinforce the Lancaster name in the world of the powerful. Adrian was expected to mingle with the daughters of these social elites, observe their manners, and select the most suitable woman to take the honored position in their family. Raymond didn't say this aloud, but his expectations were clear. After tonight, Adrian would make a choice. The young man was to step into the spotlight, smile for cameras, and charm the guests, all while silently evaluating the women around him like trophies displayed in glass cases. What Raymond didn't account for, however, was his son's distaste for superficiality, or the unpredictable force of genuine character lurking in the shadows of grandeur. While the glamour dazzled the crowd, the real test was unfolding, one that Raymond believed he controlled, unaware that destiny was preparing to unravel his plans in the most unexpected way. Adrian Lancaster had grown up surrounded by extravagance, imported art, private jets, ballrooms the size of hotels, but none of it impressed him anymore. As he stepped into the grand hall that evening in his tailored black suit, everyone expected him to glide effortlessly into the conversations of the elite. They assumed he shared their mindset, that wealth equaled worth, and status defined compatibility. What they didn't know was that Adrian had long grown detached from those expectations. He moved through the clusters of guests with calm politeness, offering nods and courteous smiles. The socialites, dressed in shimmering gowns and draped in diamonds, fluttered around him with rehearsed charm. Some complimented his looks, others praised his lineage, and a few boldly hinted at marriage prospects as if they were discussing business contracts. Their laughter was light but hollow, their words dipped in flattery rather than authenticity. One young woman bragged about her family's resorts in Monaco without being asked. Another giggled about spending $10,000 on a pair of shoes, just because. A third insisted that charity events were great photo opportunities, and not much else. They flaunted their backgrounds, achievements, and designer labels as though each fact placed them a step closer to the Lancaster fortune. None asked Adrian about his interests, his thoughts, or his values. They spoke at him, not with him. Across the hall, he overheard two guests whispering about how they planned to win him over, for the influence, not affection. One even joked about how marrying into his family would guarantee lifetime publicity. Their tones were light, but the greed beneath them was sharp. Adrian's expression remained composed, but inside, a quiet discomfort settled deeper with each interaction. He had no issue with wealth, he simply despised arrogance disguised as charm. The attendees were polished on the outside but empty of warmth and sincerity. It wasn't that they were incapable of kindness, but that most saw him as a prize to be claimed, not a human to be understood. He found himself retreating to quieter corners, observing rather than engaging. His father watched from across the room with a proud glint, assuming the evening was going exactly as planned. But Adrian's silence wasn't shyness, it was rejection. Not loud, not rebellious, but firm. The more he witnessed, the posturing, the competition, the underlying vanity, the more certain he became that this gathering had nothing to do with relationships or emotion. It was an auction of appearances, and he refused to place a bid. Little did anyone know that the woman who would catch his attention wouldn't be wearing silk or diamonds, but an apron, humility, and genuine grace. While the guests floated through the ballroom like peacocks displaying feathers, Adrian's gaze drifted elsewhere. He wasn't searching, but his attention was quietly captured by someone who wasn't meant to be seen at all. Near the corner of the hall, a young maid moved quietly between tables, collecting empty glasses and adjusting trays with practiced care. She wore a simple uniform, black dress, white apron, hair neatly tied back. No jewelry. No perfume. No attempt to be noticed. Yet there was a calmness about her, a sincerity in every motion, that stood in sharp contrast to the rest of the room. At one point, a guest accidentally knocked over a glass of wine. Instead of reacting with annoyance or disdain, the maid hurried over with a cloth and knelt to clean the spill, apologizing to the guest, even though it wasn't her fault. The woman she helped didn't thank her. She didn't even acknowledge her existence. But Adrian saw everything. Later, as she was carrying a heavy tray toward the kitchen, one of the event managers scolded her for moving too slowly. She simply nodded and continued working, not in fear, but in quiet resilience. Something about that calm strength intrigued him. Their first interaction happened unexpectedly. As Adrian stepped away from a group of boastful guests, he passed by her in one of the side corridors. She almost dropped a stack of plates when someone bumped into her, and he instinctively reached out to steady them. Their eyes met, not in shock, but in mutual acknowledgement. No flattery. No performance. Just a moment of human connection. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice polite but unshaken. "Are you okay?" Adrian asked. She nodded. "Just part of the job." He noticed the faint tiredness in her eyes, not from misery, but from effort. She didn't complain, didn't try to impress him, didn't even seem to recognize who he was. That alone made her unforgettable. Throughout the night, he found himself observing her more than the guests. She offered water to an elderly server struggling with a tray. She comforted a junior staff member who'd been scolded. When a child, one of the guests, accidentally spilled juice, she knelt beside him, cleaned the mess, and reassured him with a smile. In a hall full of glamour, she was the only one who shone without trying. Adrian didn't speak much to her that evening, but something shifted within him. For the first time that night, he felt respect. And that feeling carried more weight than any glittering gown or carefully painted smile present in the ballroom. As the evening reached its peak, the orchestra shifted into a softer melody, signaling that the night's formal highlight was about to begin. Guests gathered near the grand staircase, where a crystal chandelier cast glittering light over a sea of gowns, jewels, and calculated smiles. Raymond Lancaster, with his commanding presence and polished confidence, took center stage. His voice carried effortlessly across the hall as he welcomed the attendees and hinted that a special announcement would soon follow. Everyone knew what that meant. Whispers spread like perfume in the air. Mothers nudged their daughters to stand straighter, adjust their posture, and smile with refined grace. Some of the young women fluttered their eyelashes, while others rehearsed demure expressions. They believed this was the moment Adrian would symbolically select the woman worthy of standing beside the Lancaster legacy. Some of them had even rehearsed what they'd say if he approached them. Adrian stood beside his father, expression composed but unreadable. Raymond placed a proud hand on his shoulder and spoke of legacy, values, and the importance of choosing someone who could elevate the family name. The applause that followed was self-congratulatory, as if the crowd already saw themselves as the eligible pool of winners. Then came the moment. Raymond gestured to Adrian and invited him to speak. Cameras were raised, and the room fell into anticipatory silence. Adrian scanned the crowd, not with admiration, but with a clarity that unsettled anyone who noticed. Many expected him to walk toward the center of the group of socialite daughters and take one by the hand. Some even stepped forward slightly, confident and ready. Instead, he did something no one could have predicted. Adrian descended the steps, not into the crowd of guests, but toward the service corridor on the side of the hall. A hush of confusion fell over the room as he walked past gowns and tuxedos without acknowledging a single socialite. Every eye followed him, some in disbelief, some in offense. He stopped near one of the serving stations, where the maid he had quietly noticed all evening was refilling glasses. She froze, startled by his sudden presence. Without hesitation, Adrian addressed the crowd in a calm, steady voice. "I've seen many tonight," he said, "but only one person here showed real grace, humility, and strength without wearing a mask." He turned toward the maid, not as a man making a scandalous statement, but as someone making the most honest choice of his life. "I choose her." Gasps erupted across the room. Some guests dropped their jaws, others their glasses. The socialites stood in stunned silence, their practiced smiles cracking. Raymond's face went pale, not with disbelief alone, but with the mortifying realization that his carefully crafted plan had just been publicly upended. In that single moment, the illusion of control shattered, and the real story began. The room was frozen in disbelief. Raymond Lancaster, a man whose name commanded fear and respect in boardrooms worldwide, stood speechless as his son's declaration echoed across the grand hall. For a moment, his expression was unreadable, somewhere between shock, anger, and sheer humiliation. Cameras lowered, whispers turned to judgmental murmurs, and the sheen of prestige that cloaked the event began to crack. The maid, Lena, stood trembling, unsure whether to stay or flee. She had never imagined being acknowledged by anyone, let alone the CEO's son, and certainly not in front of 100 elites dressed in diamonds and entitlement. Raymond's associates exchanged uneasy looks, already calculating the fallout. Some guests scoffed, others whispered about the scandal, and a few watched with morbid curiosity. Raymond quickly tried to salvage the evening. He stepped forward, placed a stiff hand on Adrian's shoulder, and muttered through a controlled smile, "Son, perhaps this is not the place for jokes." But Adrian didn't waver. He calmly repeated his choice, his voice unwavering, his eyes set with certainty. The tension thickened. Raymond excused himself and his son to a private chamber, leaving the guests in uproar. Behind closed doors, the facade dropped. His voice, usually calm and strategic, rose with anger. He accused Adrian of embarrassing the family, of jeopardizing their reputation and legacy. Adrian, however, stood firm, not out of rebellion, but conviction. He spoke not with emotional outburst, but with clarity. "If character, kindness, and integrity are less important than status, then your legacy is already broken." Those words stung more than defiance. Raymond, for the first time in years, found himself speechless. He always prided himself on being a visionary, a builder of empires, yet his own son was holding up a mirror to his hypocrisy. The night ended in awkward silence, with guests leaving in confusion and gossip swirling like wildfire. Days passed. At first, Raymond refused to acknowledge the situation. He ordered background checks on Lena, expecting to find flaws, debts, or secrets he could use as leverage. Instead, he discovered a life built on hardship, dignity, and hard work. She supported her younger siblings, worked double shifts, never asked for help, and had no ulterior motive in her interaction with Adrian. Then came an unexpected moment. Raymond walked past the staff wing one morning and overheard Lena gently comforting a junior employee who had been crying over a family issue. Her words were soft, sincere, nothing like the shallow sympathy he'd heard from the refined women his circle admired. It shook him. Slowly, his anger turned into reflection. He remembered his late wife, who came from humble beginnings and possessed the same quiet strength. For the first time, he saw past Lena's uniform and into her character. When he finally spoke to Adrian again, it was without arrogance. His voice was quieter, heavier, not